New York had always been a city of ambition, of towering skyscrapers and relentless competition. It was the perfect place for someone like me, a dreamer with a blueprint in hand and a vision of leaving my mark on the skyline. Architecture wasn't just my profession, it was my obsession. Every building told a story, every detail mattered, and I had spent the last 10 years perfecting my craft. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss new stories. If you enjoyed this one, leave a like, it really helps, and don't forget to share your thoughts in the comments. Let's discuss. My name is Andrew Fletcher, but most people just call me Drew. At 31, I had built a solid reputation in the industry. I wasn't at the top yet, but I was damn close, and I was about to land the biggest project of my career. Until everything fell apart. For 5 years, I had been married to Lauren, the woman I once thought was my greatest support. She was sharp, ambitious, and knew how to navigate the world of power players better than anyone I had ever met. As a high-profile PR consultant, she had helped me network with clients, land meetings that would have otherwise been impossible, and craft an image that made investors trust me. I had always believed we were a team, partners in every sense. But looking back, I realize I was just another one of her projects, another career move in a city where alliances were built not on love, but on leverage. The first cracks started appearing months before I even realized what was happening. At first, they were small, the kind of things you tell yourself not to overthink. Lauren's late nights became more frequent, her phone always face down on the counter, vibrating with messages she dismissed with a quick swipe. She started dressing differently, sleek designer outfits that I had never seen before, ones I definitely hadn't bought her. Then there were the dinners she claimed were work, the subtle but unmistakable scent of cologne lingering on her clothes when she came home. I told myself I was imagining things. We had been busy, both of us wrapped up in our careers. Maybe I was just being paranoid. Then came Jeff Hudson, a name that carried weight in the real estate world. A man who had built an empire of luxury high-rises across the country. Every architect wanted to work with him. He had the money, the influence, and the connections to make or break a career. When my firm was shortlisted for his newest development, a multi-billion-dollar skyscraper in Midtown, I knew this was it. This was my moment. Lauren was thrilled. She even arranged the first meeting, pulling strings I hadn't even known she had access to. "This is everything we've worked for," she had said, squeezing my hand before I walked into that boardroom. For a while, it felt like we were winning. Jeff seemed impressed with my work, my vision. He invited me to exclusive events, introduced me to investors. Lauren was by my side at every function, laughing at his jokes, making sure I was always in the right conversations. It felt like a dream. But I started noticing the shift, almost imperceptibly at first. Jeff became distant, less enthusiastic in our meetings. Decisions that once seemed locked in were suddenly under review. Calls went unanswered. Lauren, on the other hand, was seeing more of him than ever. "PR strategy," she said when I asked why she was constantly meeting with him. "It's part of the game, Drew. You wouldn't understand." I tried to push it aside, focus on the work, but the doubt had been planted. And once doubt takes root, it's impossible to ignore. One evening, I found myself sitting alone in our apartment, staring at an untouched glass of whiskey, trying to shake the growing unease in my gut. Lauren had left earlier, dressed in that sleek black dress I had never seen before, telling me she had a client dinner. I had learned not to ask questions. My phone buzzed on the counter, an unknown number. "Your wife and Jeff, Hotel Royale, room 1742. I read it 3 times, my hands tightening around the glass until my knuckles went white. It had to be a mistake, a prank, someone trying to get in my head. But deep down, I already knew the truth. I told myself not to go. I told myself to be rational, to wait, to think. But I was already out the door, the streets of Manhattan a blur as I made my way to the hotel. The lobby was polished marble, filled with business travelers and well-dressed executives. No one paid attention to me as I stepped into the elevator and pressed the button for the 17th floor. The hallway was silent, the kind of thick, suffocating silence that makes your pulse thunder in your ears. Room 1742? I stood there for a moment, my breath slow and controlled. my mind racing with 100 possible explanations, each one more hollow than the last. Then I heard it. Lauren's laugh. The same laugh I had heard 1,000 times, the one she used when she wanted to charm someone, when she wanted something. I didn't knock. I didn't need to. The door wasn't even fully shut. It had been left slightly ajar, as if fate itself was inviting me to see the truth. Jeff was there, shirt unbuttoned, whiskey in hand, sitting on the edge of the bed like he owned the place. Lauren stood in front of him, heels off, her back to me, her hands resting lightly on his shoulders. They hadn't even noticed me yet. For a long moment, I didn't move. I just stood there, watching the scene play out, feeling the weight of 5 years of trust, of marriage, of partnership, collapse into nothing. When Lauren finally turned and saw me, her face drained of color, Jeff, to his credit, didn't even look surprised. He just smirked, as if this had been inevitable, as if he had already won. "Drew," Lauren started, stepping forward, but I was already backing away. I didn't shout, I didn't cause a scene, I just left. Walking back through the streets of Manhattan, I felt nothing at first. No anger, no heartbreak. Just a quiet, cold clarity. The kind of clarity that comes when you realize you've been playing a game you never even knew existed. Lauren and Jeff thought they had won. They thought I would disappear quietly, that I would take the loss and move on. They had no idea who they were dealing with. The days after that night at the hotel were a blur. I moved like a ghost through my own life, going through the motions while my mind replayed every detail, every clue I had ignored. The way Lauren had started distancing herself, the way Jeff had slowly shut me out of the project. It hadn't happened overnight. This wasn't a moment of weakness or a reckless affair. This was calculated, a plan set in motion long before I had even begun to suspect anything. And that realization burned deeper than the betrayal itself. Lauren acted as if nothing had happened. She came home late that night, slipping into bed next to me without a word. In the morning, she moved around our apartment as if we were still the same couple we had always been. She poured her coffee, scrolled through her phone, talked about her schedule for the day. I watched her, silent, studying the way she carried herself. Not a hint of guilt, no hesitation in her voice. She had already made peace with her choices. She thought I would do the same. I didn't confront her. Not yet. That would have been too easy. She was expecting anger, a fight, a dramatic explosion that would give her an excuse to walk away, to justify what she had done. If I lost control, she won. And if Jeff had really been planning to take my project, if he had used her to gain the upper hand, then I had to play this right. So I did nothing. I went to work, sat through meetings, answered emails. I pretended everything was fine. But beneath the surface, I was already making my moves. The first thing I did was call a private investigator, not just any PI, someone with experience in corporate espionage. If Jeff was trying to take my project, if he had been using Lauren to manipulate me, I needed proof. I needed to know exactly how deep this went. The second thing I did was reach out to an old friend, Daniel Cross, a lawyer I had met years ago when I was just starting out. We weren't close, but we respected each other, and more importantly, he owed me a favor. I kept the conversation vague, just enough to let him know I might need legal protection in the near future. He didn't ask questions. He simply told me to let him know when I was ready. The third thing I did was start going through my own work, combing through every file, every email, every blueprint I had sent to Jeff's team. If he was planning to cut me out, he would need to replace me, which meant he needed my designs. I needed to know what he had, what he was missing, and where I could make things difficult for him. It didn't take long for the first pieces of the puzzle to fall into place. The PI sent me his initial findings within 48 hours. Jeff and Lauren had been meeting for months, long before my project had been brought to his attention. They had private dinners, weekend trips under the guise of business. More than that, Lauren had been feeding him information about my negotiations, my plans, my financial situation, everything he needed to undermine me. The next blow came from Daniel. He did some digging into Jeff's legal history and found something interesting. Jeff had a habit of cutting people out of deals at the last second, forcing them into settlements that barely covered what they were owed. He was ruthless but careful. He never left a paper trail, never got his own hands dirty. If I wanted to take him down, I needed something solid, something that would make it impossible for him to deny what he had done. That's when I found the contract revision. Jeff's legal team had sent an updated agreement for my project a few weeks ago, a standard revision filled with technical jargon. I hadn't paid much attention at the time, assuming it was just minor adjustments. But now, looking at it with fresh eyes, I saw the trap. A clause buried deep in the fine print, subtle enough to miss on a first read. It would have transferred key intellectual property rights to Jeff's firm, allowing him to use my designs without me. Once I signed, he could replace me with another architect and still move forward with my work. I sat back in my chair, staring at the document on my screen. This had never been about an affair. Lauren wasn't just cheating on me, she was working against me. And Jeff wasn't just trying to steal my wife, he was trying to erase me. I closed my laptop and exhaled slowly. All right, if they wanted to play this game, I'd play it better. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the dim glow of my laptop, rereading every document, every email, every message that had passed between me and Jeff's team. The trap had been set for months, and I had almost walked right into it. If I had signed that revision, I would have lost everything, my designs, my project, my future. And Lauren had helped him do it. That part was harder to process than anything else. She had stood beside me, smiled at me, kissed me goodnight, all while handing over pieces of my career to the man who was planning to gut it from the inside. There was no salvaging this. No confrontation, no apology, no explanation could undo what had already been done. But I wasn't interested in closure. I was interested in consequences. "Shall I inspect your career?" Colton asked. "There probably isn't any consequences." The next morning, I went about my day like nothing had changed. I had breakfast with Lauren, listened to her talk about her plans, nodded at the right moments. She had no idea I knew. That was my advantage, and I wasn't about to waste it. I left for work as usual, but instead of heading to my office, I met with Daniel. He had already flagged the contract revision as a legal landmine, but now that I had the full picture, we went deeper. The revised agreement wasn't just unethical, it was potentially illegal. Jeff had structured it in a way that could be challenged under fraud and misrepresentation. That meant leverage. That meant I had a way to hurt him where it mattered most. But I needed more than legal threats. Jeff had built his reputation on being untouchable, on making problems disappear before they ever reached the surface. If I wanted to take him down, I needed to do it publicly, which meant I needed to wait. Let him think he had already won. Let him get comfortable. The real estate auction was in 2 weeks. That was where he planned to unveil the project, to announce his next big move to the world. Investors, media, industry leaders, they would all be there. If he was going to steal from me, he would want to do it in the grandest way possible. And that was exactly what I was counting on. In the meantime, I kept gathering. The PI continued feeding me details. Hidden bank accounts, shell companies, offshore transfers. Jeff had done this before, used others, cut them out, left them in financial ruin. But no one had ever been able to stop him. Until now. I also started laying my own traps. I fed Lauren just enough information to keep her thinking I was still in the dark. I pretended to be distracted, overwhelmed, too consumed with work to notice anything. She played right into it, growing bolder, more careless. She had no idea that every move she made was being documented. Then, a week before the auction, I sent Jeff an email. Short, polite, professional. I told him I had reviewed the contract revision and was ready to move forward. I even thanked him for his patience. He responded within the hour, eager to finalize. I could almost hear the smugness in his reply. He thought I had given up, that I had accepted my place as just another casualty in his game. That was his mistake. I wasn't backing down, I was setting the stage, and when the time came, I would make sure he never saw it coming. The night before the auction, I sat alone in my office. The city sprawled out beneath me through the floor-to-ceiling windows. The weight of what I was about to do settled in my chest, heavy but not suffocating. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It wasn't even about Lauren. This was about survival. Jeff had built his career by stepping on people like me, by cutting them out at the last second and leaving them with nothing. He thought I was another easy target, another name he could erase without consequence. Tomorrow, he would learn how wrong he was. I went over my plan one last time. Every piece was in place. The PI had gathered enough evidence to bury Jeff in legal trouble for years. Fraud, embezzlement, contract manipulation. I had the paper trail, the hidden accounts, the shell companies, all tied directly to him. But evidence alone wouldn't be enough. Jeff was too powerful, too connected. If I went through the courts, he would find a way to stall, to manipulate, to make it all disappear before it ever reached a jury. I needed something more immediate, something public. That's where the auction came in. Jeff had been hyping this event for months, calling it the biggest real estate investment opportunity of the decade. He had lured in investors from all over the world, promising them a once-in-a-lifetime chance to be part of a groundbreaking development. And at the center of it all was my design, my project, the one he had tried to steal. He was going to present it as his own, showcasing the vision, the blueprints, the renderings I had poured my soul into. He would stand on that stage and take credit for something he had no right to claim. I let him believe he would get away with it. I let him walk right into his own downfall. The event was held in one of Jeff's newly completed skyscrapers, a towering glass fortress overlooking the Hudson. The ballroom was filled with the elite of the industry. CEOs, investors, real estate moguls, the kind of people who controlled the future of the city. I arrived early, blending into the crowd, shaking hands, exchanging pleasantries. Lauren was there too, draped in an emerald green dress, standing at Jeff's side like she belonged there. She didn't see me at first, too caught up in the performance, in the illusion that she had traded up. Jeff took the stage, flashing that signature confident smile, the one that had fooled so many people before me. The room fell silent as he launched into his presentation, clicking through slides of my work, my designs. He spoke about innovation, about vision, about the future of architecture. He spoke about the project as if it had been his idea from the start. I watched the investors nod along, their interest growing with every word. They were ready to buy in, ready to trust him. Then I made my move. I stepped forward, my voice cutting through the applause just as he was about to close the deal. "That's an impressive vision, Jeff," I said, loud enough for the entire room to hear. "Too bad it's not yours." The murmur started immediately, heads turning, whispers spreading. Jeff's smile flickered for the briefest second before he recovered, his expression morphing into one of practiced amusement. "Andrew," he said smoothly, "glad you could make it. You were just about to sell investors on a project that doesn't belong to you," I interrupted. "That's interesting, considering you don't own the rights to those designs." Silence. A different kind now, charged, expectant. Jeff's eyes darkened, a silent warning flashing across his face. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said, but there was an edge to his voice now, a crack in the carefully constructed facade. I reached into my pocket, pulling out my phone. A simple tap on the screen and the massive LED wall behind him lit up. Not with his polished presentation, but with something far more damning. Emails, financial records, legal documents, proof of everything. The crowd gasped as they read the words for themselves. Saw the bank transfers, the contract revisions, the evidence that Jeff had been systematically stealing, manipulating, committing fraud. I let the images sink in before speaking again. "These documents show exactly how you tried to cut me out, how you buried clauses in our agreement to take my intellectual property, how you've done this before, using shell companies to funnel money, to erase the architects who actually did the work while you profited off their backs." My voice was steady, controlled. "But this time, you got sloppy." Jeff's composure was slipping now. He turned to the side, signaling for someone, his legal team, security, anyone, to shut this down. But it was too late. The investors were already backing away, some checking their phones, no doubt seeing the emails I had just leaked to the press. Lauren stood frozen, her face pale, realization dawning that the man she had thrown everything away for was crumbling in real time. I wasn't finished yet. "You called this the biggest investment opportunity of the decade?" I continued. So tell me, how many millions did you expect these people to pour into a project that is now under legal dispute? I gestured to Daniel, who had just stepped forward, a folder in hand. Because as of this morning, I filed an injunction preventing you from using my work, which means everything you just presented, it's legally untouchable. Everything you just presented, it's legally untouchable. The room erupted. Investors demanding explanations, lawyers scrambling, journalists pushing forward with cameras and microphones. Jeff was drowning in it, his empire cracking under the weight of his own deception. And I stood there, watching it all unfold, feeling nothing but satisfaction. Lauren finally moved then, stepping toward me, her voice low but urgent. "Drew, we need to talk." I looked at her, really looked at her. For the first time in weeks, the desperation in her eyes, the silent plea. She wasn't worried about Jeff. She was worried about herself. "There's nothing left to say," I told her, and I walked away. The chaos in the room was like a tidal wave, crashing down on Jeff with unstoppable force. Investors were shouting over one another, demanding answers, demanding accountability. His legal team had moved in quickly, trying to contain the fallout, but there was no controlling this. The press had already picked up on the scandal, their cameras flashing, reporters firing off questions that Jeff had no way of dodging. He had built his entire reputation on control, on being the smartest man in the room, the one who always dictated the terms. But now, for the first time, he wasn't in control of anything. He was unraveling in real time, and the world was watching. I stayed just long enough to see the panic in his eyes, the dawning horror as he realized how deep the hole was that he had dug for himself. Then I turned and walked away, weaving through the crowd, letting the weight of what I had just done settle into my bones. It was over. Everything Jeff had planned, everything he had stolen, everything he had built on the backs of people like me, it was all crumbling, and there was no way out. Lauren caught up with me in the lobby, her heels clicking against the marble floor as she rushed to my side. "Drew, please," she said, reaching for my arm. I stepped back before she could touch me. "Please, what?" My voice was calm, but I could see the desperation in her face. She wasn't here out of guilt. She was here because she was scared, because she had bet everything on Jeff and had just watched him burn in front of an entire industry. "You have to understand," she started, but I cut her off. "I don't have to do anything, Lauren. I don't have to listen to excuses. I don't have to pretend you weren't part of this from the beginning." I shook my head, looking at her like she was a stranger, because that's exactly what she was now. "You knew what he was doing. You helped him. And now that it's blowing up in your face, you want to explain?" Her jaw tightened, the mask slipping just a little. "You think this makes you better than me? You think you're the hero in all of this?" Her voice was sharp, bitter. "You're just as ruthless as he is, Drew. The only difference is you were better at hiding it." I almost laughed at that, the irony of it. She had spent months lying to me, betraying me, and now, when she had nothing left, she wanted to paint me as the villain. "You know what the difference really is, Lauren?" I said, my voice quiet but steady. "I didn't have to lie. I didn't have to cheat. I didn't have to stab someone in the back to win." I took a step closer, watching the way she swallowed hard, the way her fingers twitched at her sides. "And that's why you lost." I didn't wait for her response. I didn't need to hear whatever justification she had lined up. I turned and walked out of the building, leaving her standing there with nothing but the ruins of the life she had chosen. Outside, the night air was crisp, the city humming around me like it always had. But for the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe again. I had spent so long drowning in anger, in betrayal, in the quiet, suffocating weight of knowing what they had done and pretending I didn't. Now, it was over. By the time I got home, my inbox was flooded. Journalists wanting statements, investors reaching out, some angry, some impressed. My lawyer had already left me a message. Jeff's legal team had gone into full damage control mode, trying to salvage what they could, but the fallout was too big. There was already talk of lawsuits, of investigations. Some of his biggest investors were pulling out, afraid to be associated with the scandal. His empire wasn't just cracking, it was imploding. And Lauren? She had called twice, sent a long text that I didn't bother reading. I didn't need to. I already knew how this would play out. She would try to spin this, try to find a way to land on her feet. But the thing about people like her, like Jeff, is that they only thrive when they're winning. When the losses start piling up, when there's no one left to manipulate, no one left to clean up their mess, they don't know what to do. I stood at my window looking out over the city, the skyline I had spent years trying to be a part of. Jeff had tried to erase me, to take everything I had built, but now he was the one being erased. And me? I was just getting started. The fallout from the auction was swift and brutal. Jeff Hudson had built his empire on deception, manipulation, and the calculated destruction of others. But in the span of just a few days, everything he had spent years constructing came crashing down around him. By the next morning, his name was plastered across every major financial news outlet, but not in the way he had envisioned. Instead of headlines praising his latest real estate project, the stories exposed him for what he truly was: a fraud. Reports detailed how he had systematically cut out architects, engineers, and business partners over the years, how he had stolen intellectual property and funneled money through shell corporations to cover his tracks. The leaked documents I had revealed at the auction were now public knowledge, circulating through every major business network. Investors who had once lined up to work with him were now pulling out, scrambling to distance themselves before they too got dragged down with him. His legal team moved quickly, issuing vague statements about misinformation, about how everything had been taken out of context. But it was too late. The damage was done. No investor with an ounce of sense was going to attach themselves to a sinking ship, not when there were already whispers of an SEC investigation. Lawsuits started rolling in from former business partners who had been pushed out of deals just like I had almost been. Some of them had accepted their losses years ago, convinced that fighting back was pointless. But now they saw an opening, a chance to finally make him pay. And me, I didn't give interviews, I didn't release statements or bask in the spotlight. I had already done what I set out to do: expose him, take away the power he had tried to wield over me. I let the legal system handle the rest. My lawyer, Daniel, had everything lined up perfectly. The contract revisions, the financial records, the backdated documents proving how Jeff had attempted to steal my designs. It was airtight. His legal team had no room to maneuver, no technicality to exploit. If he wanted to fight it in court, he was welcome to try, but we both knew how that would end. Lauren, on the other hand, had no such safety net. Her name wasn't in the headlines, not directly, but everyone in our circles knew how closely she had been tied to Jeff, how she had played a role in everything that had unfolded. With his empire crumbling, her position disappeared overnight. The contacts she had cultivated, the influence she had gained from standing at Jeff's side, it all vanished. The people she had once called friends stopped returning her calls. The business partners who had once welcomed her into every exclusive event now looked right past her, unwilling to be associated with someone tied to such a public disaster. She called me 3 times in the days following the auction. I never answered. The messages started off measured, careful, her voice controlled as she asked if we could talk. Then came the long-winded email, carefully crafted to sound remorseful, filled with just enough regret to make it seem like she was taking responsibility. But I knew her too well. Every sentence was calculated. She wasn't sorry for what she had done, she was sorry for what it had cost her. She had thought she was betting on the winning side. She had thought Jeff was the better option, that he could give her more than I ever could. And now, she had nothing. I never responded. Weeks passed, and Jeff's situation only got worse. The lawsuits stacked up, the SEC investigation gained momentum, and more of his hidden dealings came to light. The more people dug into his past, the more they found fraud, backdoor deals, settlements paid under the table to keep former partners quiet. He was bleeding money at a rapid pace, selling off properties just to stay afloat. His carefully curated image of control was slipping, and soon there would be nothing left. One afternoon, I read an article about how his company was on the verge of collapse. Analysts speculated that bankruptcy was imminent. Some of his biggest investors had already cut ties, leaving him scrambling for lifelines that no longer existed. There was something poetic about it, about how quickly the people who had once praised him had abandoned him the second he became a liability. That was how the industry worked. The second you showed weakness, the second you stopped being useful, you were discarded. Jeff had spent years doing it to others. Now he was getting a taste of his own medicine. Lauren's name wasn't mentioned in the article, but I didn't need to ask where she was. She was nowhere. Without Jeff, without his power, she had lost everything she had gambled for. As for me, I moved forward. The project Jeff had tried to steal was now mine again, but I wasn't interested in salvaging it. It had been tainted, associated too closely with his name, and I wanted no part of it. So I walked away, letting the remnants of his deal rot. Instead, I started fresh. New designs, new investors, new opportunities. I built something better, something that belonged entirely to me. There was no more fear of being cut out, no more hesitation about where I stood. I had earned my place in this city, and I had done it on my own terms. Months passed, and one evening, as I stood at my office window, I looked out over the skyline of the city I had fought so hard to be a part of. The lights stretched endlessly before me, the pulse of New York as strong as ever. This city had a way of breaking people, of testing them, of forcing them to prove they belonged. Jeff had thought he could erase me. Lauren had thought she could trade me in for something better, but in the end, they had been the ones who disappeared, while I was still here, still building, still moving forward. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't bitter. I had won, and that was enough.